The rain-slicked streets of the forgotten outskirts of Eldridge Hollow gleamed under the sodium glow of flickering street lamps, turning the cracked asphalt into a mirror of shattered dreams. It was just past midnight when the cries pierced the night. A young woman, no more than 25, huddled against the rusted chain-link fence of an abandoned warehouse district. Her name was Sophia, though to the world she was just the forgotten sister, cast aside by a family that had long ago traded blood ties for cold ambition. She clutched a tattered backpack, her clothes soaked through, trembling not just from the chill, but from the fresh bruises blooming on her arms, marks of a life where promises were as fleeting as the storm clouds overhead. A group of shadowed figures loomed nearby, their laughter harsh and mocking, voices slurring with cheap liquor as they jeered at her desperation. "Run back to your high and mighty kin, girl," one snarled, kicking at a puddle that splashed her face. She was alone, utterly, the weight of years of neglect crashing down like the thunder rolling in from the hills. That's when the low rumble cut through the downpour, a deep, throaty growl that vibrated through the ground like the heartbeat of some ancient beast awakening. Headlights pierced the veil of rain, twin beams slicing the darkness as a single motorcycle emerged from the mist-shrouded road. It wasn't just any bike. This was a custom beast, chrome accents gleaming even in the storm, its rider clad in weathered leather that spoke of miles and memories etched into every stitch. Ethan Blackwood, the man they called the Iron Ghost in the biker circles of the Midwest, pulled up slow, his engine idling like a predator's warning. At 42, Ethan was a millionaire in shadows, his fortune built not from boardrooms but from the grit of underground racing circuits and savvy investments in forgotten garages, turning rust into gold. But wealth meant little to him. It was the scars from a war-torn youth, the brother lost to a betrayal he'd sworn never to repeat, that drove him through nights like this. He killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying Sophia's sobs, and dismounted with the grace of a man who'd faced down worse than rain. The jeering stopped as Ethan's boots hit the pavement, water splashing up in deliberate arcs. He was built like the bikes he rode, solid, unyielding, with a salt and pepper beard framing eyes that had seen too much fire. The shadows shifted uneasily, one of them stepping forward with false bravado, a bottle in hand. "This ain't your business, old man," he spat, but his voice cracked. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. He just stood there, rain tracing rivulets down his face, and fixed them with a stare that carried the weight of unspoken storms. "Walk away," he said simply, his tone low and even, like gravel under tires. The air thickened, charged with the scent of wet earth and ozone, and for a moment the world held its breath. The leader hesitated, then backed off, muttering curses as his crew slunk into the night, leaving only the patter of rain and Sophia's ragged breaths. Ethan knelt beside her, shrugging off his jacket to drape it over her shoulders. The leather was warm from his body, heavy with the faint aroma of engine oil and distant campfires. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice a rare softness amid the hardness of his life. Sophia flinched at first, her eyes wide with the terror of too many broken trusts, but something in his gaze, steady, unjudging, held her. She was the forgotten one. She, the youngest sibling in a dynasty of real estate tycoons who'd built empires on the backs of the overlooked, including her. Her parents had promised her a place in the fold, a vow whispered on her 18th birthday, but ambition had eroded it like acid on metal. Now, evicted from the family estate after daring to question their shady dealings, she was adrift, a ghost in her own story. Why help me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled a small flask from his inner pocket, strong coffee, black as midnight, and offered it to her. As she sipped, The warmth spreading through her like a forgotten ember reigniting, Ethan glanced at the horizon, where lightning forked the sky. "Because I know what it's like to be left behind," he said finally. "Made a promise once, long ago, to a brother who didn't make it back. Swore I'd never let someone slip through the cracks if I could stop it." His words hung in the air, heavy with the ghosts of desert sands and the echo of gunfire from a conflict that had claimed more than lives. It had stolen his faith in easy loyalties. Sophia looked up, her dark hair plastered to her face, and for the first time that night, a spark of something like hope flickered in her eyes. This stranger, this biker with hands calloused from wrenches and roads, wasn't just passing through. He was a crossroads, a chance collision that could rewrite the script of her unraveling world. They didn't speak much as he helped her to her feet, guiding her toward his bike. The machine purred back to life under his touch, its chrome catching the first hesitant glimmers of dawn breaking through the clouds. Sophia hesitated, glancing back at the warehouse's looming silhouette, a symbol of all she'd lost. But Ethan's hand on her arm was gentle, reassuring, and she climbed on behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist, tentatively. The engine roared as they pulled away, tires cutting through puddles that sprayed like silver arcs, leaving the shadows behind. In that moment, as the wind whipped through their hair and the rain began to ease, Ethan felt an unfamiliar pull, not just duty, but something deeper, a thread of connection weaving through the scars of his past. He didn't know it yet, but this act, born of an old promise, would draw him into a storm far greater than the one they'd escaped. A family empire rotten at its core, secrets that could shatter lives, and a love that would demand he risk everything to honor a vow he hadn't even made yet. The road ahead twisted through the hollows, flanked by skeletal trees clawing at the paling sky, their branches whispering secrets to the wind. Ethan's mind raced ahead, piecing together the fragments she'd shared in hushed tones. The tycoon father, who'd built a fortune on evictions and backroom deals, the siblings who'd turned blind eyes to her pleas, the forgotten sister label that had become her cage. He'd seen corruption like that before, in the underbelly of cities where money drowned out morality, and it stirred the iron promise in his veins. Justice, not with fists, but with the unyielding truth of loyalty. As the first rays of sun gilded the horizon, painting the world in hues of gold and shadow, Sophia leaned closer, her breath warm against his back. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. And Ethan, the millionaire biker who'd long ridden solo, sensed the weight of a new path unfolding, one where redemption wasn't just for the lost, but for the ones who found them. Miles blurred by, the hum of the engine a steady rhythm against the dawn's symphony of birdsong and distant traffic. They stopped at a roadside diner on the edge of town, its neon sign buzzing faintly, promising coffee and sanctuary. Inside, the air smelled of frying bacon and fresh brew, a stark contrast to the night's chill. Sophia slid into a booth, Ethan's jacket still around her, while he ordered black coffee for him, something sweet and hot for her. As they sat, the conversation flowed like the steam rising from their mugs, halting at first, then deeper. She spoke of the family estate, a sprawling mansion of marble and lies, where promises were currency, but rarely redeemed. Her father, Victor Hale, had built it all on the backs of the displaced, his development projects, leaving trails of broken homes. Sophia had tried to expose the underhanded tactics, bribes to officials, forged documents, but her voice had been silenced, her place erased. Ethan listened, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup, the faint scars on his knuckles telling their own story of battles fought and won through sheer will. He'd walked away from his own family's expectations after the war, forging a brotherhood among the roads and revs of the Iron Promise crew, a chosen family bound not by blood, but by oaths that held firmer than steel. "Family ain't always the ones who share your name," he said quietly. his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart stutter. "It's the ones who ride with you through the dark." In that diner, with the jukebox crooning a forgotten ballad, something shifted. Sophia saw in him not a savior, but a mirror, a man carrying his own forgotten burdens, yet choosing to extend a hand. And Ethan, for all his guarded heart, felt the stirrings of a connection that defied the miles he'd put between himself and vulnerability. As they finished, the sun, fully risen now, casting long shadows across the checkered floor, Ethan made a silent vow. He'd get her back what was hers, not through vengeance, but through the quiet power of truth uncovered. Little did he know, this chance encounter would summon his crew from across the states, their bikes converging like a thunderhead, ready to challenge an empire built on deceit. The forgotten sister was forgotten no more, and in her eyes Ethan glimpsed a future where promises, once broken, could be reforged in the fire of unexpected love. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, casting a warm, amber glow over the worn formica tables and the faint steam curling from mismatched coffee mugs. Sophia traced the edge of her cup with a trembling finger, the sweetness of the hot chocolate doing little to chase away the chill that had settled deep in her bones. Across from her, Ethan leaned back in the booth, his broad frame filling the space like a sentinel, his eyes, storm-grey and unyielding, fixed on her with a quiet intensity that made the air between them feel charged, alive. The jukebox in the corner clicked to life, spilling out a low, gravelly tune about lost highways and second chances, its melody weaving through the sizzle of the grill and the murmur of early morning truckers nursing their brews. She hadn't meant to spill it all so soon, the jagged edges of her family's empire, the way Victor Hale's real estate ventures had swallowed neighborhoods whole, displacing families with the stroke of a pen and a whisper of influence. "They called it progress," Sophia said, her voice gaining strength as the words tumbled out. "But it was just greed dressed in suits. I found the files, ledgers hidden in the estate study, proof of payoffs to bend zoning laws, homes raised without a backward glance. When I confronted them, my brother laughed, said I was imagining things. My sister, she just looked away. Her eyes, a deep hazel flecked with gold, met his, searching for judgment, but finding only the steady anchor of his gaze. The bruises on her arms peeked from under the sleeve of his jacket, faint purple shadows like storm clouds on pale skin, reminders of the shove from the estate's security when they'd barred her from the gates the night before. Ethan nodded slowly, his calloused fingers drumming a soft rhythm on the table, echoing the distant rumble of thunder that had faded with the storm. He'd seen empires like that crumble from the inside, back in his racing days, when backers with deep pockets played dirty to keep the finish line in sight. But this was personal, a rot that festered in the heart of family, the kind that left scars deeper than any road rash. "I've ridden through towns turned to ghosts by men like your father," he said, his voice a low rumble, laced with the faint drawl of his southern roots, places where the only thing left standing is the echo of broken oaths. But you stood up. That's more than most do. He paused, the weight of his own history pressing in, the promise to his brother, Jake, whispered under a foreign sky amid the acrid smoke of battle. "Watch each other's backs," Jake had said, clapping Ethan's shoulder before the ambush that claimed him. Ethan had carried that vow like a tattoo on his soul, turning it into the iron promise, a creed that bound his crew tighter than blood. Sophia felt a warmth bloom in her chest, not from the drink, but from the way he listened, as if her words were worth the miles he'd traveled to hear them. No one had ever looked at her like that. Not since she was a child, trailing after her siblings in the sprawling gardens of the Hale estate, invisible even then. "You're different," she murmured, a tentative smile ghosting her lips, the first real one since the rain had started falling. Most people see the name Hale and they back away, or worse, they want something from it. Her hand brushed his across the table, accidental at first, then lingering, the contact sending a spark through her like static from wool. Ethan's breath caught imperceptibly, his guarded heart cracking just a fraction under the weight of her touch. He'd built walls high as canyon rims, but here in this roadside haven smelling of pie crust and possibility, they began to erode. Outside, the sun climbed higher, painting the parking lot in golden hues that danced off the dew-kissed chrome of Ethan's bike. He paid the bill with a nod to the waitress, a sturdy woman named Rita, her name tag crooked from years of service, and guided Sophia to the door. The bell jingled like a promise as they stepped into the crisp morning air, the scent of wet pine and asphalt rising to meet them. "Where to now?" she asked, her voice steadier, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes like morning fog. Ethan mounted the bike, the leather seat creaking under his weight, and glanced back at her. "First, a safe place to regroup. My crew's got a safe house up in the hills. Nothing fancy, but it's off the grid, away from prying eyes." He didn't mention the network of riders already stirring at his midnight text. Brothers from the Iron Promise scattering across state lines like sparks from a flint. Word of a woman in peril, tied to corruption that smelled like the underbelly he'd fought before, had them revving engines in garages from here to the border. As she climbed on behind him, her arms wrapping more confidently around his waist, the engine roared to life, a beast awakening with a throaty bellow that vibrated through their bones. They peeled out of the lot, tires gripping the gravel with a crunch that spoke of forward motion, leaving the diner shrinking in the rear view. The road wound upward, flanked by dense woods where sunlight filtered through leaves in dappled patterns, turning the path into a ribbon of light and shadow. Sophia pressed closer, her cheek against his back, feeling the steady beat of his heart through the thin fabric of his shirt. Conversation flowed in snippets over the wind, stories of her childhood dreams of justice, his tales of midnight runs across empty plains, chasing horizons to outrun ghosts. Laughter escaped her once, light and unexpected, when he described a botched race where his bike had fish-tailed into a hay bale, leaving him smelling like alfalfa for days. But as the miles stretched, tension crept in like gathering clouds. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket, a secure line from Lucas, his right hand in the crew, a wiry veteran with a laugh like thunder and loyalty forged in the same fires. "Boss, got eyes on the Hale estate. Security's doubling down, and there's talk of a private investigator sniffing around. Your girl's stirring the pot." Ethan's jaw tightened, the wind whipping his beard as he accelerated. Victor Hale wouldn't let a loose thread dangle. He'd pull it until it unraveled everything. Sophia sensed the shift, her grip tightening. "What is it?" she called over the roar. He didn't sugarcoat it. "Trouble's coming, but we've got promises to keep." In that moment, as the hills rose to embrace them, Ethan realized this wasn't just about honor anymore. It was about her, the forgotten sister who'd ignited something in him, a fierce protectiveness laced with the raw edge of falling. The safe house loomed ahead, a weathered cabin nestled in the pines, its chimney puffing welcome smoke. But safety was fleeting. The real storm brewed in the valleys below, where family ties twisted into nooses, and love demanded a rider face the abyss head-on. And now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The safe house perched on the hillside like a sentinel carved from the earth, its timber walls weathered by decades of wind and secrets, blending seamlessly into the pine-thick forest that cloaked it from the world below. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney, carrying the faint, comforting scent of burning oak and fresh coffee brewing inside. Ethan eased the bike to a stop on the gravel drive, the engine's growl fading to a whisper as he killed it, the sudden quiet amplifying the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a hawk wheeling overhead. Sophia dismounted, her legs unsteady from the ride, but her posture straighter now, as if the ascent had lifted some invisible weight from her shoulders. She inhaled deeply, the crisp mountain air laced with resin and earth, a balm against the stale oppression of the city she'd fled. He led her up the creaky porch steps, the wood groaning under their boots like an old friend sharing a confidential tale. The door swung open with a familiar creak, revealing a space that was more haven than hideout. Exposed beams overhead, a stone hearth crackling with embers, and mismatched furniture gathered from roadside rescues. Sunlight slanted through salt-streaked windows, casting golden pools on the plank floor and illuminating dust motes that danced like fireflies in daylight. Lucas was already there, his lean frame silhouetted against the kitchen counter, pouring steaming mugs from a dented percolator. At 38, Lucas was the crew's quiet strategist. His face etched with lines from too many stakeouts and not enough sleep, his dark hair tied back in a practical knot. He'd ridden in from the east at Ethan's signal, his own bike parked out back, camouflaged under a tarp woven with branches. "Welcome to the nest," Lucas said, his voice a gravelly drawl, softened by genuine warmth, as he handed Sophia a mug. She accepted it with a nod, the ceramic warm against her palms, and sank into an armchair by the fire, Ethan's jacket still draped over her like a shield. Ethan clapped Lucas on the shoulder, a silent exchange passing between them, years of shared roads and unspoken trusts. "What's the word?" Ethan asked, settling onto the arm of Sophia's chair, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, a steady presence amid the uncertainty. Lucas pulled out a worn tablet, its screen glowing with maps and notes scribbled in hasty code. "Hale's goons are circling the wagons. Word from our eyes in the city. They're spinning a story about you being unstable, Sophia. Some family drama gone wrong. Private security's been beefed up at the estate, and there's a tail on anyone sniffing too close." Sophia's grip tightened on the mug, the steam rising like a veil over her face, but her eyes burned with a resolve that hadn't been there in the rain-soaked streets. "They always rewrite the truth to fit their narrative," she said, her voice steady, threaded with the quiet fire of someone who'd endured too many erasures. "My father, Victor. He built that empire on whispers and shadows. I found the documents, transfers to shell companies, deals that displaced entire blocks without a trace of remorse. I thought if I showed them to the right people it would stop, but they locked me out, called me the problem." The words hung in the air, heavy as the fog rolling up from the valley, and Ethan felt that familiar pull in his chest, the echo of his own betrayals, the brother whose name he still whispered on empty roads. He reached over, his hand covering hers briefly, the calluses on his fingers a map of labor's past. "You're not the problem, you're the spark." His touch lingered a second longer than necessary, sending a quiet current through them both, unspoken and electric. Lucas cleared his throat, diffusing the moment with a wry smile. "Crews mobilizing. Got Jonathan riding in from the south. Big guy's got connections in legal circles, off-the-book stuff. And Matthew's scouting the estate's perimeter. We don't storm in, we uncover, piece by piece." The Iron Promise wasn't about brute force. It was a brotherhood forged in the aftermath of loss, where every member carried their own ghosts, veterans like Ethan and Lucas, mechanics who'd lost homes to corporate greed, wanderers seeking purpose in the roar of engines. They'd helped before. A widow reclaiming her farm from developers, a kid pulling his dad from the jaws of addiction. Now, this forgotten sister had woven into their fold, her fight mirroring their creed. As the afternoon deepened, the cabin filled with the rhythm of preparation. maps unrolled on the table, coffee refills, and the low hum of strategy. Sophia wandered to the window, gazing out at the vista where the hills rolled into the haze-shrouded plain. The Hale estate, a distant smudge on the horizon. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in strokes of amber and crimson, turning the pines into silhouettes of ancient guardians. Ethan joined her, his reflection merging with hers in the glass. This place. It's where I come when the road gets too loud, he said softly, his breath fogging the pain. After Jake, my brother-in-arms, we made a pact. No one left behind, no promise broken. It's kept me going. She turned to him, her hazel eyes searching his face, tracing the lines that spoke of laughter buried under sorrow. And now, you're pulling me into it. He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his beard. Because seeing you out there, in the rain, it hit like a memory I didn't know I needed. You're not forgotten, Sophia, not anymore. The words bridged the space between them, and she stepped closer, her hand finding his arm, the contact igniting a warmth that spread like dawn light. In that suspended moment, with Lucas tactfully occupied in the kitchen, something bloomed, tentative, profound, a connection born not of pity, but of shared scars. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, the world narrowing to the scent of pine on his skin and the steady beat of her heart echoing his own. But peace was a fragile guest. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the cabin floor, Ethan's phone vibrated, an encrypted alert from the crew's network. Jonathan's voice crackled through. Trouble at the estate. Security roughed up a reporter asking questions. They're covering tracks fast. Ethan's jaw set, the firelight flickering across his features like embers of resolve. Victor Hale's reach was long, his corruption a web that snared the unwary. Sophia pulled back, her expression hardening. We can't wait. Those files, I know where they're hidden. In the study, behind a false panel. The plan crystallized then, whispered in the glow of lamplight. Infiltrate under cover of night, not with confrontation, but with the stealth of truth-seekers. Extracting proof that could topple the facade. They moved with purpose as stars pricked the velvet sky, the cabin's lights dimmed to slits. Lucas revved his bike softly in the rear, a scout heading out first, while Ethan and Sophia prepared. Flashlights tucked into vests, a small recorder for evidence. The air cooled, carrying the chill of impending action, the forest alive with nocturnal whispers. Ethan paused at the door, turning to her. This could get rough. You sure? She met his gaze, unflinching. For the first time, I feel seen. I'm sure. He nodded, the weight of a new promise settling in his bones, not just to protect, but to stand beside her, heart open to the fall he'd long avoided. As they mounted up, engines purring low, the road called them back toward the valley, where shadows of family loomed and love tested the limits of loyalty. The night unfolded like a promise waiting to be kept, fraught with risk and the quiet thunder of redemption on the horizon. The moon hung low over the valley like a silver medallion, its pale light filtering through the canopy of pines and casting elongated shadows that danced across the winding road. Ethan's bike led the way, its headlight carving a path through the encroaching night, while Lucas trailed 100 yards back, his machine a silent shadow, ensuring no unwanted eyes followed. Sophia clung to Ethan's waist, the vibration of the engine thrumming through her like a shared pulse, the cool rush of wind tugging at her hair and carrying the sharp tang of damp earth from the forest floor. The descent from the hills felt like plunging into the unknown, each curve tightening the knot in her stomach, not just from the speed, but from the gravity of what lay ahead. The Hale estate, a fortress of stone and secrets, where her own blood had branded her an outsider. They parked the bikes a mile out, hidden in a thicket off a forgotten service road, the engines ticking as they cooled. releasing faint wisps of heat into the chill air. Ethan dismounted first, his boots crunching on fallen needles, and extended a hand to Sophia. Her fingers met his, steady despite the tremor she felt inside, and in that brief clasp, she drew strength from the warmth of his skin, roughened by years of gripping handlebars and turning wrenches. Lucas joined them, his breath visible in the crisp night, a compact backpack slung over one shoulder containing tools of the trade, lock picks disguised as keychains, a slim camera for capturing evidence without a trace. "Perimeter's quiet," he murmured, his eyes scanning the tree line. "Matthew's in position on the east side, feeding us visuals. No patrols visible, but Hale's security runs deep. Cameras, motion sensors. We stick to the shadows." The trio moved like ghosts through the underbrush, the estate's silhouette emerging gradually from the darkness. A sprawling edifice of ivy-cloaked walls and manicured lawns that gleamed unnaturally under floodlights. Sophia's heart pounded as they neared the rear garden wall, the scent of blooming night jasmine clashing with the metallic bite of the chain-link fence. This was home once, a place of gilded illusions where laughter echoed hollowly through marble halls, but now it loomed as an adversary, its windows dark, save for the faint glow from her father's study. Ethan scaled the fence first, his movements fluid and precise, dropping silently on the other side and signaling them over. Sophia followed, her palms slick against the cold metal, a surge of adrenaline sharpening her senses, the distant hum of a generator, the rustle of leaves like whispered warnings. They crept across the lawn, keeping low amid ornamental shrubs whose leaves brushed against their faces like curious fingers. The air grew heavier here, laced with the faint chlorine from the pool and the underlying mustiness of old money. Lucas peeled off toward a utility shed, his task to loop the exterior cameras for a 10-minute window, a skill honed from years of evading corporate enforcers in defense of the overlooked. Ethan and Sophia pressed on, hugging the estate's shadow until they reached a side door, its lock yielding to his deft touch with a soft click that echoed like a heartbeat in the silence. Inside, the corridor stretched dim and opulent, Persian rugs muffling their steps, the walls lined with portraits of stern ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow their passage. Sophia's breath came shallow as they navigated the familiar maze, her hand brushing Ethan's arm for guidance in the low light. The study door loomed at the end of the hall, ajar as if mocking her exile, and she pushed it open with trembling fingers. Moonlight spilled across the mahogany desk, illuminating leather-bound ledgers and a globe that had once fascinated her as a child. "There," she whispered, pointing to the bookshelf, her voice a thread of urgency. Ethan nodded, sliding volumes aside until his fingers found the concealed latch. The panel swung inward with a faint groan, revealing a safe embedded in the wall, its dial glinting coldly. He knelt, ears attuned to the house's subtle sounds, a clock ticking in the distance, the creak of settling beams. As he worked the combination, numbers Sophia recalled from overhearing her father's late-night mutterings, the room felt alive with peril. Footsteps echoed faintly from upstairs, a security guard's rounds perhaps, and Ethan froze, his body shielding hers instinctively. Time stretched, taut as a bowstring, until the safe clicked open, exhaling a puff of stale air heavy with dust and deceit. Inside lay the files, crisp folders stamped with shell company logos, receipts for bribes disguised as consulting fees, maps of razed neighborhoods marked with red ink like wounds. Sophia's hands shook as she extracted them, stuffing copies into a waterproof pouch, while Ethan photographed the originals with Lucas's camera, the flash muted to a ghost of light. But victory soured in an instant. A floorboard creaked outside the door, too close, too deliberate. Ethan doused the light, pulling Sophia behind the desk as the knob turned slowly. The guard entered, a burly silhouette in the moonlight, flashlight beams sweeping the room like a searchlight. His radio crackled softly, voices murmuring about increased vigilance. Heart slamming against her ribs, Sophia pressed against Ethan, his arm around her waist, an anchor in the storm. He smelled of pine and resolve, his breath steady against her ear. Easy. We've got this. The beam lingered on the bookshelf, inches from the ajar panel, and she held her breath, memories flooding, nights hiding from her father's rages, the forgotten sister shrinking into corners. The guard paused, then muttered into his radio and retreated, the door clicking shut behind him. They waited, counts of 10 dragging into eternity, before slipping out, files secured. The return through the garden was a blur of adrenaline-fueled sprints, vaulting the fence with scrapes and whispers, rejoining Lucas, who confirmed the cameras had reset undetected. Back on the bikes, engines idling low, Sophia clutched the pouch to her chest, the weight of truth finally hers. As they roared into the night, the estate shrinking in the mirrors, she leaned into Ethan, her voice cutting through the wind. "You didn't have to risk this." He glanced back, his eyes catching the moonlight, fierce with something unspoken. "For you." "Yeah, I did. Promises like this, they're what keep the dark at bay." The ride back to the safe house blurred the line between peril and possibility, the stars wheeling overhead like witnesses to their daring. In the quiet hours that followed, as dawn's first blush painted the hills, Ethan and Sophia sat by the hearth, the files spread before them like battle plans. Lucas pored over details, coordinating with Jonathan and Matthew via encrypted calls, the crew's network humming with purpose. But amid the strategy, glances lingered, her hand on his knee, his fingers tracing her wrist where bruises faded. Love crept in unannounced, a quiet force binding their scars, turning the forgotten into the found. Yet shadows loomed, Victor Hale's web extended further than files, and retribution brewed. The iron promise would ride, not for war, but for the justice that redeemed the soul. If this story is touching your heart, hit that like button to show your support. The safe house's hearth crackled softly in the pre-dawn hush, embers glowing like watchful eyes, as the first light of morning seeped through the cabin's windows, painting the wooden walls in hues of rose and gold. Sophia sat cross-legged on the threadbare rug, the pilfered files splayed before her like fragments of a shattered mosaic, their edges crisp under her fingertips. The air hung heavy with the scent of cooling coffee and aged paper, mingled with the faint, earthy residue of pine sap clinging to their clothes from the night's covert dash. Ethan paced nearby, his boots thudding a measured rhythm on the floorboards, while Lucas hunched over the table, his tablet screen casting a blue glow on his furrowed brow as he cross-referenced the documents against public records. Ghost towns of evictions, neighborhoods erased for luxury condos that stood empty like monuments to greed. Sophia's hazel eyes scanned the ledgers, her breath catching at familiar signatures. Her father's bold scrawl, authorizing payments to officials who'd turned blind eyes to the fallout. Families scattered, lives upended without recourse. "This is it," she whispered, her voice threaded with a mix of triumph and sorrow, the weight of betrayal settling deeper as the words blurred through unshed tears. Proof of the shell companies funneling money to silence complaints, zoning overrides that buried communities under concrete. I knew it was bad, but it's a cancer. The fire popped, sending a spark skittering across the hearth, mirroring the flicker of resolve in her gaze. For years, she'd been the invisible thread in the Hale tapestry, dismissed as the dreamer too soft for their world. Now, holding these pages, she felt the stirrings of power, not the cold kind her family wielded, but something warmer, rooted in truth. Ethan stopped pacing, kneeling beside her with a grace that belied his solid frame, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. The contact grounded her, his touch carrying the faint warmth of the bike's exhaust and the steady assurance of a man who'd navigated worse tempests. "You've got the map now," he said, his voice low and resonant like the rumble of an idling engine. "We expose it clean. Leaks to the right journalists, anonymous drops to watchdogs. No guns, no chaos, just the light of day on the rot." His storm-grey eyes met hers, holding a depth that spoke of his own unearthed promises, the vow to Jake, etched in the sands of forgotten battles, now extending to her like a lifeline tossed across stormy waters. In the quiet intimacy of the cabin, with the world still asleep beyond the pines, he brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, his thumb lingering on her cheek. The gesture was simple, yet it ignited a spark between them, a silent acknowledgement that this fight had woven their paths irrevocably. Lucas glanced up from his screen, his wiry frame tense as he tapped out a message to the crew. "Jonathan's got a contact, a retired judge with a nose for corruption. He'll vet the files, make sure they're ironclad before we move. Matthew's holding position near the estate, says Hale's security is on high alert, lights blazing like a fortress under siege." The strategist in him clicked into place, mapping routes and contingencies. But even he paused, sensing the shift in the room. The way Sophia leaned into Ethan's touch, her body relaxing for the first time since the rain-slicked streets. The Iron Promise Brotherhood wasn't just riders, it was a web of loyalties, each member a thread pulled from their own unraveling lives. Jonathan, the burly southerner with a law degree buried under bar fights. Matthew, the quiet scout whose sharp eyes had saved more than one soul from the shadows. They were converging now, engines firing up across the miles, drawn by Ethan's call and the creed that bound them. No one forgotten, no promise forsaken. As the sun crested the hills, flooding the cabin with golden light that danced across the files like spotlights on a stage, a low rumble echoed from the drive. More bikes arriving, their arrivals staggered to avoid drawing eyes. The door swung open, admitting Jonathan first, his massive build filling the frame, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder stuffed with legal pads and burner phones. Behind him came Matthew, lean and watchful, his leather vest patched with the subtle emblem of their circle, an iron chain unbroken. Greetings were brief, claps on backs, nods of solidarity as they gathered around the table, the room alive with the scent of fresh arrivals, road dust, leather polish, and the underlying tang of determination. Sophia rose to join them, no longer the outsider but part of the fold, her voice steady as she outlined the evidence, pointing to key transactions that traced her father's hand in displacing hundreds. The planning unfolded like a well-rehearsed choreography, voices overlapping in measured tones, timelines for anonymous submissions, escape routes if Hale's reach extended to retaliation, alliances with community groups who'd suffered the evictions. Ethan watched Sophia, pride swelling in his chest as she held her own, her forgotten status shed like an old skin. During a lull, as the others stepped out to check the perimeter, he pulled her aside to the porch, the morning mist curling around their ankles like a veil. The valley stretched below, the Hale estate a distant gleam amid the sprawl, but up here in the crisp air laced with dew-kissed ferns, the world felt conquerable. "This started with a promise I made to a ghost," Ethan admitted, his beard catching the light as he leaned against the railing. "But with you, it's become something real. I don't ride alone anymore." She turned to him, her hand finding his, fingers intertwining with a certainty that chased away the night's remnants. "You saw me when no one else did. That's the promise I hold on to now." Their lips met then, tentative at first, then deepening. A kiss tasting of coffee and courage, the wind whispering approval through the pines. It was a moment stolen from the storm, a quiet vow amid the gathering thunder of justice, but the respite shattered with a sharp buzz from Ethan's phone, an urgent ping from a lookout in the city. Victor Hale had mobilized. Private investigators were tracing leads back to the safe house, whispers of a family intervention turning ugly. Tires screeched in the distance, not friends, but shadows closing in. Ethan broke the kiss, his expression hardening as he rallied the crew inside. "They're coming. We move now, files to Jonathan's contact, then scatter till it's safe." Sophia nodded, pouch in hand, her heart racing not with fear, but with the fire of purpose. The bikes roared to life outside, a convoy forming like a steel river ready to carve through deceit. As they mounted up, Ethan at her side, the horizon beckoned with the promise of reckoning. Love had found the forgotten sister, but it demanded they ride into the fray together, honoring the bonds that outlasted empires. The road ahead twisted with peril, yet in their unity, redemption gleamed brighter than the rising sun. The engines thundered like a gathering storm as the convoy crested the hill, a phalanx of chrome and leather slicing through the morning mist that clung to the valley like a reluctant shroud. Ethan led the pack, Sophia's arms locked around his waist. Her body pressed close against a relentless vibration that pulsed through them both. Behind, Lucas flanked right with Jonathan's massive frame, a shadow on his tail, while Matthew brought up the rear, his sharp eyes scanning the mirrors for any sign of pursuit. The air whipped past, sharp with the scent of pine resin and sun-warmed asphalt, carrying the faint, acrid tang of exhaust that mingled with the promise of confrontation. The Hale estate loomed larger now, its spires piercing the sky like accusatory fingers, but the riders moved as one, a chosen family, unbound by blood, forged in the fire of oaths that no empire could shatter. Sophia's heart hammered in sync with the roar, the pouch of files tucked securely in her vest, its weight a talisman against the fear coiling in her gut. Below, the estate's gates stood ajar, security vehicles idling like predators at bay, their lights flashing erratic warnings. Victor Hale's retaliation had arrived swift and merciless, a cordon of hired muscle blocking the drive, radios crackling with orders to contain the situation. Whispers from the crew's network painted the picture, Sophia's brother and sister inside, spinning tales of her delusion, while their father orchestrated from the shadows, his influence buying time to bury the evidence forever. But the iron promise didn't charge blindly. They circled wide, peeling off onto a service trail that skirted the perimeter, dust kicking up in plumes that veiled their approach like battlefield smoke. Ethan signaled a halt in a copse of oaks, the bike's engines cutting to a hush that amplified the distant shouts from the estate. He dismounted, helping Sophia down with a steadying hand, his touch lingering as their eyes met, hers fierce with the spark he'd ignited, his softened by the depth of what had grown between them. "This ends today," he murmured, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade through fog. "Not with blood, but with the truth they can't bury." The crew gathered in a tight huddle, faces etched with the quiet resolve of men who'd stared down worse. Jonathan's broad shoulders squared, Lucas's fingers twitching toward his tablet, Matthew's gaze already mapping escape vectors. Sophia stepped forward, her voice clear and unyielding. "The study's window faces the garden. If we draw them out front, I can slip in one last time, plant the originals where they'll be found during the raid." The plan ignited like a match in dry tinder, a feint to lure the guards. Jonathan's legal ally en route with warrants greased by the file's previews. The press tipped anonymously to converge like vultures on carrion. They moved with precision born of shared scars, Ethan and Lucas revving toward the gates, engines bellowing a challenge that echoed off the marble facade. Tires screeched as security surged, barriers toppling in a cacophony of metal and shouts, the air thickening with the ozone bite of revving motors and the sharp crack of warning shots fired skyward. Sophia darted through the chaos, skirt of her jacket flapping like a banner, Jonathan covering her flank with his bulk as they vaulted the garden wall. The estate's opulence mocked her now, fountains gurgling indifferently. Roses blooming blood-red under the climbing sun as she slipped through the side door, heart pounding against her ribs. Inside, the halls felt colder than memory, portraits of hale ancestors glaring down like judges in a trial of flesh and bone. Footsteps thundered from the foyer, her brother's voice barking orders, but Sophia pressed on, the study's door a threshold to reckoning. She replaced the files in the safe, leaving them brazenly visible, a digital copy uploaded to a secure cloud that Jonathan's contact would unleash like a flood. Alarms wailed suddenly, red lights pulsing through the corridors, but she was already out, rejoining Jonathan in the garden as floodlights swept the grounds like accusatory beams. Gunfire popped, non-lethal rounds from security, met with the crew's evasion tactics, bikes weaving through topiaries, engines drowning out the fray. Ethan spotted her silhouette amid the turmoil, relief flooding his veins like cool rain on scorched earth. He gunned the throttle, skidding to a halt as she leaped on behind him, her arms wrapping tight, breath ragged against his neck. "It's done," she gasped, the words a vow amid the din. The convoy reformed, peeling away from the estate as sirens wailed in the distance, local authorities arriving, tipped by the crew's network, badges gleaming with the promise of impartial scrutiny. Victor Hale emerged on the portico then, his face a mask of thunder, flanked by siblings whose eyes widened at the sight of Sophia riding tall, no longer forgotten, but fierce. Shouts chased them, but the gates clanged shut on empty air, the riders vanishing into the winding roads like ghosts reclaiming the dawn. Hours blurred into a tense vigil at a neutral waypoint, a roadside motel on the outskirts, its neon sign flickering vacancy, like a beacon of reprieve. The crew dispersed to watch points, leaving Ethan and Sophia in a dim room smelling of faded linens and instant coffee. News alerts buzzed on the tablet, headlines breaking across networks, the files exposed in a torrent, shell companies unraveled, bribes laid bare, evictions chronicled with names and faces of the displaced. Victor Hale's empire teetered, investigations launching like arrows from a drawn bow, his family's denials crumbling under the weight of irrefutable proof. Sophia sank onto the bed, exhaustion etching lines on her face, but her eyes shone with a light unshadowed for the first time. "It's over," she whispered, pulling Ethan close, his leather creaking as he enveloped her. He held her, the steady rise of his chest a rhythm against hers, the faint scent of road dust and her jasmine shampoo weaving through the air. "Not over. Just beginning," he said, his lips brushing her forehead, the kiss deepening into one that sealed their bond, born of rain-slicked nights and midnight rides. The iron promise had upheld its creed, justice not through vengeance, but through the unyielding honor of truth. Victor's downfall would come quietly, arrests, asset freezes, a legacy of greed reduced to whispers, but for Sophia it meant freedom, a chance to rebuild on foundations of chosen loyalty. Ethan, the millionaire biker who'd long carried solitude like a second skin, found in her the redemption of his old vow to Jake, a promise extended, a family forged in the roar of engines and the quiet strength of love. As the sun dipped low, painting the motel window in fiery hues, they stepped outside to the waiting bikes, the crew reassembling with nods and faint smiles. The road stretched endless before them, horizons calling with the whisper of new promises. Sophia mounted behind Ethan, her hand in his, the engine's growl, a symphony of renewal. They rode into the twilight, the forgotten sister no more, her heart claimed by the man who'd seen her soul. In the chosen family of the Iron Promise, redemption wasn't a destination but a journey, honored in every mile, every heartbeat shared under the vast, forgiving sky. Thank you for riding along on this tale of forgotten promises and unbreakable bonds. If it touched your heart, please subscribe for more stories of redemption and courage, and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter in these Northern Confessions.